I live alone in a small apartment, in a relatively quiet building. I've always been skeptical about these Hasmans stories, but something happened here that still gives me goosebumps to this day. A few weeks ago, I started to hear footsteps in the hallway during the night, always around 3:30 a.m. They were light steps, almost imperceptible, but enough to wake me up. At first, I thought it was something normal. Maybe it was the noise of the building, or some neighbor coming back late. But the steps were always at the same time, and always in the same place. I lived alone, had no animals, and the neighbors were silent. The idea of being the sound of someone walking around the house didn't make sense. So one night, I decided to investigate. I put the security cameras I had in the apartment, just to be reassured that I wasn't getting paranoid. When I reviewed the images the next morning, I was speechless. I saw a woman, standing in the hallway, looking directly at the door of my room. She wasn't walking, she was standing still, as if watching me. But the strangest thing was that I didn't hear her arrive. There was no sound of footsteps, nothing. I just saw her standing there, motionless, with her eyes fixed on the door. I went over the images, and I couldn't find any explanation. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. There was no one but me in the apartment, and the cameras hadn't recorded anyone entering or leaving. At first, I thought it could be some kind of technical failure. Maybe the recorder was corrupted. But it wasn't the case. I reviewed each recording several times, and she was always there, exactly in the same place, at 3:30 in the morning. The worst of all was that she never appeared in person. I tried to open the bedroom door at dawn, but even with the feeling that she was there was never anyone. I even tried to go out the door to look in the hallway, but it was always empty. And the cameras never failed. She was always there. The feeling of being watched was intensifying every night. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. I started to get tense every time the clock marked 3:30 a.m. On some nights, I couldn't sleep, hoping to see that woman on the screen once again, with that gaze fixed on my door. But the worst thing was that, even knowing she was there, I could never do anything. She never showed up physically, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I thought about moving, but after a while, I began to question my sanity. The woman in the hallway never touched the door, never did anything but look at me, as if he were waiting for something, or just watching me, without any intention. I tried to talk to the doorman, to other neighbors, but no one seemed to know anything. When I mentioned the cameras, they were scared, but no one confirmed having seen something similar. I still live here, but the dawns have never been the same again. Until today, around 3:30 a.m., I wake up, almost expecting to see her again on the screen. I don't know if it's a haunting, a delirium, or if there's something more sinister going on. All I know is that, whenever I look at the camera screen, the woman is there, standing, looking at my door. And you? Have you ever had the feeling that something is there, but you can't see it with your own eyes? I noticed something strange in my house, right after renting a room to a tenant. The boy seemed calm, without problems, and behaved normally. But soon things started to get out of place. I know it may seem paranoid, but I'm not going crazy. I began to realize that the objects in the house were being modged. Small things like a cup that I always left in the same corner of the counter, or a book that I didn't remember leaving on the table. At first, I thought it was something in my head, but then things got weirder and weirder. One night, after a long week of work, I decided to have a quick snack before going to sleep. I went to the fridge, and to my surprise, the food I had left the night before simply disappeared. It wasn't just any item. It was a lasagna that I had made especially for myself, and it was practically whole when I put it there. When I asked my tenant, he looked at me with a confused expression and swore he hadn't moved anything. "It's not me," he insisted, but something inside me didn't seem to believe. He seemed sincere, but the feeling that something was very wrong only increased. The next day, I started to be more attentive to details. When I wasn't at home, things seemed to keep moving. But what really scared me was when I decided to take a test. I left a specific item, a book, in the living room, right on the table. Something I always saw there. When I came back later, the book was no longer in the place. I went to my tenant's room, and he was lying down, quiet, saying he didn't know anything. The feeling that something was happening there, but that no one was willing to admit, became unbearable. It was only that night that things started to get really bizarre. After lying down, I heard noises coming from the walls of my room. Small sounds, as if someone were moving inside. The sound was low, but clearly audible. I was frozen, trying to understand what was happening. The tenant was in his room, or at least I thought he was. I got up to check, and when I passed through the wall that seemed to be the source of the noises, something made me stop. It was not possible that someone was hiding there, but at the same time, everything pointed to that. That night was not quiet. I kept listening to the noises coming from the walls, but now with an even more intense feeling that there was something there. The walls began to slat, as if someone was trying to move between the spans, or even breathe near me. My heart raced, and I was totally paralyzed, not knowing whether to call the police or confront my tenant again. The next morning, I decided that I would investigate the house more calmly. I looked for any sign of something strange on the walls or in other corners of the house. When I entered the kitchen, I noticed something even more terrifying. Food from the refrigerator was missing. They weren't just small things, but items I had bought that morning. I knew that the tenant couldn't have consumed all that without leaving a trace, and he swore he hadn't caught anything. The fear began to turn into something palpable, a feeling of being watched and even manipulated by someone who was there, but did not show himself. I didn't know what else to think. I decided I was going to confront the tenant, but when I got to the door of his room, I came across something strange. The door was slightly ajar, which never happened, since he always closed it completely. I entered without really knowing what to expect, and to my surprise, the room was empty. He wasn't there, but the bed was made, and the window was open, which made me even more confused. I was sure he was there, or at least he had been recently. I tried to turn it on, but the phone was off. The feeling of being observed became even stronger. I began to hear noises coming from all directions during the night, as if someone was moving around me, always in the dark, always out of my reach. Finally, I found something that made me freeze with fear. A sheet of paper, folded and left on the kitchen table. She had nothing written, just a simple drawing, but enough to terrify me. It was the outline of a person, with a mark in the center of the chest. The idea that someone was hiding inside the house, moving from one place to another without being seen, made me lose track of time. I could no longer distinguish reality from my paranoia. My boyfriend and I live in an apartment on the 13th floor of a building. It was a quiet place, overlooking the city, and one of the things we liked the most was the silence that reigned at night. But everything changed a few weeks ago. It started in a very subtle way, a soft knock on the window glass, always at 3 in the morning. We didn't think much about it at first. After all, it could just be the wind or some noise caused by the movement of the buildings around. But as the nights passed, the beats became more insistent. That's when one night, I woke up and, at the exact moment I heard the beat, my boyfriend also woke up. He didn't care much the first time. He thought it was some reflection or something like that. But the next day, I made sure to check all the locks, the windows, and anything that could explain the sound. Everything was in order. The next night, the beat came back. But now it was no longer a simple touch. It was stronger, more repetitive, as if someone was really hitting outside, with some force. It made me uncomfortable, but we still tried to ignore it. Until one morning, the knock was so loud and prolonged that it almost looked like they were trying to break the glass. The next morning, after that stronger beat, we decided we needed to do something. We installed a simple security camera, pointed directly at the living room window, which was where the sounds seemed to come from. I confess that I thought it was an exaggeration, but I also didn't want to wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. The first night with the camera was quiet, no noise. The second one too. I even started to think that maybe it was just something in our head, that all the tension had created an expectation, and now we were getting scared for nothing. But on the third night after the installation, around 3:05 a.m., the camera beeped indicating movement. I woke up with the notification on my cell phone, and when I looked at the recording, I froze. It was not possible. In the image, you could clearly see a silhouette in the glass. Something, or someone was outside our window on the 13th floor. It was a dark shape, a little blurred by the quality of the camera, but it was there. And the most absurd thing, the window had no balcony, no support, nothing. There was no way anyone was there. My boyfriend tried to stay calm, but I panicked. And that night, we couldn't even sleep anymore. The next day, we spent hours trying to find some logical explanation. We went up to the building's terrace to see if there was any way to access our window, but it was impossible. There was no way anyone could get off the roof without professional climbing equipment, and even so it would be very dangerous. We talked to the doorman, looked at the building's security cameras, and nothing. No one strange, no suspicious movement. The feeling was horrible, as if our house, which has always been a safe place, had been invaded in a way that we could not understand or control. The next night was the worst. We didn't even turn off the lights. We stayed in the living room, watching anything to try to distract our heads. It was almost 4 in the morning when, out of nowhere, 3 dry knocks on the glass came. This time we were awake. We saw the window vibrate slightly in front of us. I ran to check the camera, but at the exact moment the beats happened, the image was all distorted, full of drizzle, as if something had interfered with the signal. That's when I started to feel really terrified. It wasn't just the beats, it wasn't just the figure. It was as if something was playing with us. As if he were watching us and liked our fear reaction. The next night, my boyfriend and I decided not to sleep at home. We went to my parents' house, trying to convince ourselves that it was just some technical problem, some illusion caused by fatigue, I don't know. But the truth is that, even far away, the bad feeling didn't pass. When we came back, 2 days later, we found the living room window with marks. As if they were fingerprints scattered by the glass, outside, very high, where no one could reach without a rope or something like that. The police were called again, but this time they kind of made it clear that they couldn't do much. There was no sign of burglary, or anything that indicated a crime. We ended up deciding to install more powerful security cameras, those that record even in the dark with a motion sensor. I set up notifications on my phone for anything suspicious. On the first night after that, we received an alert at 3:22 a.m. When we looked at the recording, I swear I almost dropped the cell phone from my hand. In the video you could see, for a fraction of a second, a figure leaning against the window. It was like a person, but kind of distorted, as if it was melting or falling apart in the image. After that, we never heard the beats again. But to this day I can't look at that window without feeling that absurd fear again.